Webster's dictionary defines a superhero as a fictional hero having extraordinary or superhuman powers. And that couldn't be further from the truth. You see, this textbook definition completely ignores the fundamentals of heroism in favor of highlighting someone's strength or power. But what happens when you remove that power? Is that so-called superhero no longer considered a quote-unquote hero? Obviously not. While some may argue yes, because they're technically not super, I'd like to think there's something more to people than their physical strength. And I think a lot of people would agree with me too, because that's where we get the phrase real-life superhero when referring to firefighters or medical workers. They don't have any sort of superhuman powers, and yet they're arguably superheroes. Why? I like to think it's because of their character and the constant bravery they face and the, heat of the fire. And in fiction, we see a lot of superhero archetypes, but probably none like the ones featured in My Hero Academia. My Hero Academia is set in a world where superheroes exist. Like, a lot of superheroes exist. There's nice ones, there's mean ones, there's weird ones, and there's sus ones. There's so many heroes that there's a ranking system and even schools dedicated to fostering them, hence the academia part. These heroes refer to their powers as quirks, and through training, they are able to upgrade and evolve them. And the ones without powers, aka everyday people, are referred to as quirkless. And we follow a quirkless boy, Deku, who idolizes superheroes, specifically the number one hero, All Might.
I am here.
Deku's life is pretty boring until one day he gets attacked by some random slime villain. Just as things look grim, All Might appears and saves him. After witnessing All Might's incredible strength firsthand, Deku is starstruck. In the commotion, Deku manages to hold on to All Might as he jumps away from the scene, and they land on another rooftop. Here, Deku expresses his long-held dream of becoming a superhero, despite not having a quirk. However, wanting to protect him, All Might initially tells Deku that being a hero without a quirk is impossible. Later though, after seeing Deku's bravery when he rushes in to save his friend from a villain, despite having no powers, All Might is deeply moved. Recognizing the boy's potential, All Might decides to share his quirk one for all with Deku. He passes on this immense power by giving Deku a piece of his DNA, allowing him to inherit the ability to use one for all, thus starting Deku's journey to becoming a hero in the plot of the show. While we're mainly going to be talking about All Might, it's important to note Deku's heroic moments is a defining scene that symbolizes everything All Might is about, which is why he decided to pass the torch to Deku. And it's that same courage, that eagerness to do good, that makes All Might, All Might.
I am here.
The easiest character to compare All Might to would of course be Superman. They're both symbols of peace and hope, have an honest sincerity to them, a good heart, and are literally the number one heroes in their respective universe. But these types of characters are hard to make interesting because what could possibly stop them? How can we, as people, relate to them if they're so optimistic and so unstoppable? Because if we just have the super optimistic force of nature, the story is not going to be that interesting. And that's actually why kryptonite was invented, to cause conflict for Superman. However, My Hero Academia takes the kryptonite from Superman a step further, and All Might's true weakness is time. You see, when we first meet All Might, it's through Deku, and he's seen through this idealistic lens. He's big, he's strong, and nothing can get in his way. He's always smiling to instill hope in others. But in reality, when he comes face to face with his childhood hero, everything we know about him becomes subverted. His true form isn't muscular or massive, he's actually meek and scrawny. The so-called unstoppable pillar of hope is actually a thread of yarn. This optimistic force of nature is a hollow shell of a man slowly dying each time he uses his power. After being this iconic hero for so long, it's taken a toll on him both mentally and physically. And he shares this massive secret with Deku, knowing that if his true state ever got out, villains would take advantage. And the only reason why he continues to be a hero, despite it killing him, is because he believes that without him, there's nothing stopping Despair from winning. And as the series progresses, we learn that he's able to use his other form for a brief period of time, with each time he uses it reducing the length, and therefore creating a countdown to when the world is left vulnerable again. This conflict gives greater depth to All Might, as we see him struggle with the fact that he can't always be a superhero.
I'm supposed to be the guy who's always smiling, right? I'm the symbol of peace. People everywhere have to think that I'm never afraid. But honestly, I smile to hide the fear inside.
His self-doubt, hidden behind a smile, makes him human. The stakes for All Might aren't just physical. Each fight is a test of whether he can still live up to the world's expectations and protect the people he loves. And that's the reason why he chooses a successor, because he knows that too. But the problem is that he barely has time left, and the next generation might not be able to handle what's coming. This becomes the focal point during the USJ arc, when villains invade Class 1A's training. The teachers and students are forced to fight, but none are really capable of standing up to this monstrous creation, Nomu, a creature specifically designed to defeat All Might and neutralize his attacks. And Deku, the next in line successor, can't even get a firm grasp on his powers. So All Might rushes to save them, but by the time he arrives, he's already low on time in his powered up form. Despite this, he confronts the villains and Nomu by himself. In this battle, we see All Might push to his limits. Even as his strength begins to fade, he refuses to back down, because in his mind, if he falters, hope falters with him. He knows that everyone, Deku, his students, and the world, depends on him, so he pushes himself beyond his physical limitations. Whereas in his prime, he could have easily defeated them with 5 punches, he needs to land over 300 in a matter of seconds to defeat one Nomu, knowing that each punch shortens the amount of time he can stay in his hero form. This moment shows that, despite knowing his body is breaking down by the punch, All Might can't help but push forward, because he believes it's his responsibility to protect the world no matter the cost. But the cost is great. After the fights, he's left drained, still hiding his true identity to the class, but his time limit growing ever shorter, and his internal clock ticking faster towards the day he can no longer fight. This moment is heroic not because All Might has extraordinary superhuman powers, it's because with every punch, he's knowingly losing those Superman powers, and still deciding to stand up for what's right. It's the risk he's taking with losing his life, becoming the most vulnerable he'll become, but still doing it because it'll save the lives of others. It's being brave in the heat of fire. Obviously, after this moment, All Might's mentality is ever more melancholic. He spends most of his time now preparing Deku and saving the heroic antics for those special moments. It's then we're given some perspective on All Might's condition, and we meet his previous sidekick, Sir Night-Eye, whose quirk grants the ability to see into the future with almost complete accuracy. After a previous battle with All for One, the ultimate villain in the show, All Might was left with devastating injuries and caused him to be permanently weakened, explaining why there's a time limit to his powers. After being hospitalized following the battle, Sir Night-Eye uses his foresight to see All Might's future, and was met with a grim vision. All Might would die fighting a villain if he were to not stop. So he pleaded and begged All Might to retire while he still could, and preserve his image as the symbol of peace. But All Might, being the person he is, refused to listen, believing that as long as the world continued to cry out for help, he couldn't afford to retire. This strained their relationship, and it eventually caused All Might to look for a successor, but it gave even more insight to his mentality and struggle. He has the burden of feeling irreplaceable in a world that depends on his strength, even as that strength fades. And now, he has to fight knowing the eventual price he'd have to pay. Which makes the rematch in Camino between All for One and All Might all the more stressful. Following the abduction of one of the students and the rise of the League of Villains, heroes from all over Japan set out on a mission to rescue Bakugo. However, Everyone is caught off guard when they discover All for One to be behind it. So, of course, All Might steps up to fight off the newly powered All for One, way past his prime, knowing that in order to win, he has to push even further past his limits, with the whole world watching. During the fight, All for One exposes All Might's true skeletal form to the world, showing that the symbol of peace isn't as strong as they might have thought. And it's then, for the first time, the world sees All Might stop smiling. The world now sees this vulnerable and scared side of him. With the iconic smile gone, so too is the strength they saw in him. But somehow, managing to fight past his inner turmoil, All Might musters the little power he has left to defeat All for One in his most devastating attack. Using nothing but pure reflexive strategy, he somehow manages to stun All for One as he prepares for one last attack, with his face now filled with a smile, but one of contempt. He knows that the punch will end his reign as the symbol of peace and send a message to the next generation of both heroes and villains. So, with everything he has left, he summons the last of his power. And defeats All for One, but losing his power in the process. The aftermath is devastating. All Might returns to his true form, frail and weak, in front of the entire world. His time as the symbol of peace has officially ended. But, in a defining moment of courage, bravery, and humility, he sends a message to instill hope in others past his reign.
Now, it's your turn.
His words, though short, echo throughout the entire world. We can obviously look at this through the lens of our protagonist Deku, where he sees it as All Might passing the torch to him as the next symbol of peace. But if we view it from the perspective of the world, his words ring much deeper. Yes, he's acknowledging Deku, but he's acknowledging so many other things too. To warn the villains that just because he's in a weak state, that doesn't mean that other heroes are, but to mainly acknowledge that he can no longer carry the mantle of being the symbol of hope, in a way that reminds people that hope can be found in more than just a symbol, and perhaps in them too. From this point on, All Might plays a relaxed role in his retirement. One significant change though is his relationship with the number 2 hero, Endeavor, who now has to step up as the number 1. But that transition is not seamless, as Endeavor had a reputation for being rude, egotistical, and not so hope instilling. Endeavor had always wanted to surpass All Might, to become number 1 himself, but through strength and skill, not through All Might's forced retirement. So not only does he grapple with public opinion, he grapples with his own self-doubt. And All Might kinda knew of Endeavor's animosity toward him, but shows no bitterness or resentment. Instead, he offers Endeavor wisdom and support. He recognizes the immense pressure Endeavor is under and encourages him to find his own path, knowing firsthand how heavy the burden of being the symbol of peace can be, so he empathizes with Endeavor's struggle to define what being the number 1 hero truly means. This subplot shows All Might's understanding about being a hero. Heroism isn't about being a carbon copy of someone else, but rather finding the strength to inspire hope in a unique way, putting aside your differences with others for the sake of a better world. And finally, that leads us to the most recent season of My Hero, Season 7, where things are finally coming to an end. Shigaraki, the overarching antagonist, is at his peak, and the whole world faces the threat of extinction. With a powerless All Might, no beacon of hope to inspire others, several devastating defeats, and many deaths of heroes, it's up to the remaining few people to take a stand against evil. Throughout the season, we practically watch everyone push to their limits, while the powerless have to watch from the TV screens in fear. Endeavor faces off against his own son, Hawks loses his quirk, Mirko loses almost all of her limbs, and Deku has to solo Shigaraki. All the while, the so-called protector of peace must watch the whole fight from a secure location. What else is he supposed to do? But the remarkable thing about All Might's character is that no matter the odds, he's going to do his best to stand up for what's good. So he gets the idea to distract All for One, knowing that he'd never pass up on the opportunity to get his revenge. All for One is again at his peak in terms of strength, and All Might is on his last breath, scrawny and practically useless. But he's got a trick up his sleeve,
Meet Armored All Might!
using features inspired by his students and fellow heroes. In this battle, possibly his last, his friends are right there with him. This battle is genuinely a losing fight for All Might. It's just a way to stall for time, and he knows this. In this moment, he remembers Sir Night Eye's words to him, and understands that this is the moment he was talking about. The fight he won't come back from. He takes so many brutal punches that leaves him in a critical condition, and his suit tells him there's no recovery. The world is also once again watching the #1 hero fight for his life, in a twisted parallel to the Camino fight. It's then his life flashes before his eyes, and we understand why he became a hero in the first place. He too was a quirkless boy before being given powers, and after the death of his family, he wanted to create a symbol of hope people could look up to in their darkest hour. Most people in tragedy are greeted with bleak faces, but if they could see someone smile in those times, maybe they could too. He remembers that the strongest are the ones who smile when hope seems lost. And instead of grimacing like he did at Camino, All Might chooses to laugh. Yes, to obviously distract and anger All for One to stall for more time, but for a deeper reason too. Again, he knows that this could be his very last moments, and he wants to go out smiling, leaving a lasting legacy for future generations to look up to. It's a powerful moment that shows that being courageous doesn't require big muscles or grand powers, but the quirkless can stand up for what's right too. Even at his weakest state, the most powerful villain in history can't erase his smile. And that's the type of message that'll overcome fear. It's a message to the whole world watching that even if he dies, that doesn't mean hope has to die with him. Because, really, the enemy wins if you choose to live in fear and stop fighting for what's right. For he is proof that anyone can be a hero. And that's the last we see of All Might in the anime for now. The season ends on a cliffhanger and leaves us wondering what's going to happen next. Obviously, the whole story has concluded in the manga, but I haven't read the manga, so I don't know what happens yet. But if I had to make a prediction, All Might isn't going to die. Which in a way kind of sucks because it feels like a cheap cop-out of what they've been building towards. But in reality, the story has never been one where main characters die. But I guess we'll see what happens to All Might very soon. We'll soon see more of the magic that makes his character so compelling. Seeing more of Small Might. All Might is able to redefine what being a superhero means, showing that heroism is a choice, not a birthright. Because once the smoke and mirrors are gone, and the huge optimistic smile leaves his face, it's then you realize that he's just as vulnerable as everyone else. And yet, despite that, he still chooses to have hope, put that smile back on, and go, well,
Go,